I think that it's really important that we have these conversations on climate change, on our elections, on social justice, and how all these things are related to each other, impact our lives and our communities directly, and really at the end of it, what happens is up to us. So I'm Saad Amer. I'm the founder of Plus One Vote, which is an organization dedicated to getting out the vote. We focus our activism on one simple question: who's your plus one? Who is the one person that you're going to bring with you to the polls? Everything is going to come down to voter turnout in this election. It's really about organizing and pushing our communities out to vote to make change. For Plus One Vote, we focus on a few key issues like climate justice, social justice, and voting rights, and believe that people power, that us, we're the ones who determine what happens in this democracy, point blank. And, for me, my personal background is in climate change, climate organizing, climate policy. And I want to kind of go a little bit through my journey to illustrate how important this election is to all of us. And so for me, I started my climate activism right here. I'm in Long Island right now. Shout out to all my Long Islanders, New York, what up? And started when I was 13 in the 9th grade. And it was, for me, about a love of nature. I went out to I went out with my high school bio teacher to a local area. I saw this beautiful land space, a land space that my high school would then go to preserve as the Fish Thicket Land Preserve and have 100 acres permanently preserved. And it was just so beautiful. And I started really organizing just through a love of nature and wanting to bring out, we literally trained dozens of tour guides, brought out thousands of students across the community just to teach about nature, ecosystems, climate change, and the relationship between us, people, and nature. And, that kind of kept growing and growing, and it was really powerful to see how young people particularly understood what was at stake and what these issues really meant. And, I would go on to go to college and study environmental science and public policy. The first thing I did after I graduated was I moved to India. So I was living in India in the eastern Himalayas in an area called Darjeeling. And it's like a very mountainous area that is impacted very directly by the monsoons, these massive seasonal rains. But as a result of climate change, and their very unique weather pattern, right? We know that climate change will impact the most extreme climates first and the most extremely. And, what's more extreme than the Himalayas, right? So I was like, let's go. But as I was there on the ground, living in these communities, working with the locals and learning from them and hearing their stories, it was so clear what the devastation looked like there on the ground. And that included, these monsoon rains were becoming more intense. And as a result, the soil of the area was becoming more and more loose. It was harder to grow crops, on which these people rely. It was harder to travel. I would have to hike miles just to get to these remote communities. And, the monsoon rains would further, as they were loosening up the soil, result in more landslides in the area. It was a mountainous area, right? And so what that meant was that there would just be landslides that would disrupt life there. For me, I actually, was in one of the landslides. I was on the edge of a road taking pictures. The road beneath me collapsed, and I fell 3 or so stories, scraped up my entire back, and was just like, wow, this is what the crisis means. This is how it's really impacting people very tangibly. And that was just one small instance that happened to me personally. On the local level, I remember a few weeks after that, as I was on an expedition to one of these other villages, I saw a sort of scar in the mountain, and it was just like a straight trail of dirt. And so I was asking the locals, what happened there? And they were explaining it was a landslide that had actually hit a school and killed 4 children while it was in session. And I think that illustrates so clearly how the climate crisis is impacting the most vulnerable people now directly. And I realized that, it was going to be so important that we had to, take action on this. And those issues that are in India were also true for, here in the United States. Whether it be Hurricane Sandy right here on Long Island in 2012, the wildfires in California, flooding in the Southwest. It's so important that we start to understand the gravity of this crisis and take action. And so we have to keep on organizing to take action. And as I was working with politicians here in America, I saw there was just an unwillingness to take action on the climate crisis. So the reality is, if we want these things to change, we need to vote. We need to vote for politicians who care about our planet, who care about the earth, and who care about us, because this issue comes down to us. What's so exciting about this program today is that it is an intersectional conversation about food, about social justice, about how all these issues are related, and your vote can directly impact the outcome of those issues. And so I'm so excited for all the topics that we have today. Huge shout out to Future Party, Climate Resolve, and Animalia for putting this up. Our first panel is going to be on climate policy and individual action. Don't forget that voting is so important, and make sure you bring a +1 with you to the polls. It's going to be super epic. This election is going to decide so much. There's a debate tonight. Watch out. Climate change is one of the topics. So I'm excited to see what you guys have to say about that. Feel free to, message me, DM me, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, all the things. And if you are able, leave a donation to +1 vote so we can keep mobilizing voters on the ground. So I'm super excited to kick it off to our first panel. And first we have Niall McCann. He is the Conservation Director of the National Parks Rescue and is a National Geographic's explorer. Super excited to hear what you have to say.
Thanks for having me, Sad. It's incredibly nice of you. And hello to everybody else back at home. As Sad said, I'm Dr. Niall McCann. I'm the Director of Conservation at National Park Rescue, a National Geographic explorer, a trustee and a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, and I dabble in a little bit of TV presenting with a focus on human-wildlife conflict and humanity's impact on the planet. So you'll notice from my accent that I'm conspicuously not from the United States, and yet here I am moderating a US-centric discussion on climate change in the lead up to the election on November the 3rd. The US election, your election, is the one election that everyone in the world should be allowed to vote in, because we are all affected by the results. Because of this, I believe that it's not just acceptable, but apposite, that this panel will be moderated by a global citizen rather than a US citizen. Now, I'll say from the start that this isn't a debate about climate change, because there isn't a debate about climate change, in the same way as there isn't a debate about gravity. There are people who understand that man-made climate change is happening and that gravity tends to pull us downwards, and there are people that don't understand this. These two positions are not equal, and today's discussion will be predicated on the empirical fact that man-made climate change is happening and that it is reversible. It's the responsibility of all of us as global citizens to ensure that we interact with the world around us in a way that is cognizant of man-made climate change, in the same way as it's vital for you as an individual to interact with the world around you in a way that's cognizant of gravity. Because in both of these cases, if we fail to do so, the consequences are not trivial. When it comes to climate change, the United States is almost uniquely delinquent, from having by far the highest per capita greenhouse gas emissions of any nation to its withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. And yet US citizens, organizations, cities and states are also leading the way in the fight to mitigate the damaging effects of climate change. And tonight I'm honored to be joined by 4 incredibly talented people who are at the forefront of this fight, and who I would like to invite to the stage now to introduce themselves. And so please allow me to welcome, first up, Brynlindblatt. Bryn, on you come.
Thank you. Good afternoon, people. I'm calling in from Los Angeles.
Excellent. And next to the stage is Dani Richter.
Hi, everybody. I'm joining you from Silver Spring, Maryland, just outside DC.
Great stuff. Next up is Michelle Clark.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Clark. I'm in London, England, like you know.
I'm in Wales, but I won't hold that against you.
Sorry about
Just down there. That's all right. I think we're going to be independent in the next couple of years, by the way things are looking, so we're getting further and further away from you. So last up to the stage is Ivy Jagmeet.
Hi, I'm in Seattle, Washington.
Great stuff. Thank you, Ivy. It's my pleasure to have you all gathered here. So let's get the party started. And to kick this conference off, I'll put the first question to the whole panel. So with the United States election just around the corner, why isn't climate change a bipartisan issue when many agree that it should be? So Dani, can I start with you?
Sure. Certainly this should be a bipartisan issue, but I think that what you have to realize is that people approach things from an emotional perspective first. And so I think that you have to, first of all, if you want to connect with people, first of all, connect on an emotional level. And then you can get to facts, show them that you're on their side. And I think that I did my PhD in oceanography, focused on climate change. And that was my approach, was the facts first. And I came to realize that it doesn't really work. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about how do you make emotional appeals, and certainly within Citizens Climate Lobby, that's something that we work on and train. Connect on values first, find common ground, and then build from there to the action. So that would be my input here.
Great answer, thank you. So next, can we go to Michelle? Michelle, what would you have to say?
I thought that last answer was really good and very well said. It's one of my enormous frustrations that science has been politicized so much, and it absolutely should not be a bipartisan issue. The science is really clear, and the evidence that people can see with their own two eyes, from the fires that swept the West Coast to the frequency and power of the hurricanes that come up from the Gulf. The science is overwhelming, so it should not be a bipartisan issue.
No, it should not. So Bryn, why isn't climate change a bipartisan issue?
Sure. I think there's still too much money in politics, and there's a fair amount of wealth that's been generated by fossil fuel industry from polluting our planet, and powerful interests out there like the Koch brothers that are still sort of holding on to that and trying to get every last drop out of oil that they can. And so, you see them running disinformation campaigns and misleading Americans into believing that we've got this choice between good jobs and a healthy planet. And it just couldn't be any farther from the truth. So climate resolve, we try to get people to really believe that acting on climate isn't a nasty medicine. It's not a sacrifice. There's really a lot of opportunity there to be improving quality of life and making it a more equitable world.
I think that's a really important point, the fact that living in a world that is pro-climate is living in a better world, and there are better jobs, and there are more jobs available if we put climate first. So it's almost remarkable that we are still in such a retrograde situation because of that, and counterintuitive that jobs are the reason, when really jobs shouldn't be the reason. Yeah, great answer. Ivy, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I 100% agree with Bryn that the root of it is really fossil fuel money. It's not a secret that the fossil fuel industry has poured, a ridiculous amount of money into denialist think tanks and pseudoscience, and that they've been lining the pockets of politicians for decades. And, I think their fossil fuels, they're making climate a partisan issue because it benefits them. So that's my answer.
Great answers, everybody. So we'll now get started with the first specific question, and I'll start with Dani, if that's all right. So Dani, as Vice President of Government Affairs at Citizens Climate Lobby, first of all, for our viewers at home, can you explain to us what is a lobby, and specifically what Citizens Climate Lobby does and strives to accomplish, and how does your organization get people involved in the intersection between climate and voting?
Sure, I'd be happy to kick this off. So lobbying is actually very straightforward. Lobbying is just asking for what you want. And just that if you're lobbying, you're asking a member of Congress for what you want. So what we do, as our name makes pretty clear, is we lobby, we ask for what we want of members of Congress. We get regular citizens to do it, people who don't have so much money. And we teach them how to do that better, how to do that effectively. And we get them to lobby about climate. And we would like to address climate. We would like to stop adding greenhouse gas emissions to the atmosphere, get this under control. And so what Citizens Climate Lobby is about is really two things. The first thing is manifesting political change. And the second thing is empowering regular citizens to make that change. We believe that an empowered citizenry is what is missing in today's dysfunctional politics. Both Bryn and Ivy brought up money, and I would say that one of the fundamental bets of Citizens Climate Lobby is that you get enough people involved, and that's worth all the money in the world. So we are betting the ranch, as we like to say, on empowered citizens. And we believe that those empowered citizens can change our politics. And yes, I said change our politics. We're about thinking big here at Citizens Climate Lobby. And we get people involved in their democracy in ways they didn't think possible. I think that we're certainly interested in voting. I'll talk about that in a second, but we go beyond voting. We don't just get our people out to vote after they vote. We teach them how to go and make their voice heard to their elected representatives and make it clear to those elected representatives that climate is an important part of their vote. And if they want to keep that vote, then they should maybe consider some things. Our volunteers are also making it clear that they expect climate to be on their agenda and that we're active in the community creating more climate voters. Another really, really important part of what we do is that we do this with appreciation and respect. That's actually our only rule, our one rule. If you're going to go in to speak with a member of Congress, you have to find something that you appreciate, genuinely appreciate about their record, and then you have to express that appreciation to them. And if you can't do that, then you can't call yourself CCL. And it seems like a fundamental thing, just a basic way that we should interact with each other. But I think that in today's politics, it really stands out as a bit revolutionary to start from a place of appreciation and respect. And I talked about what we're doing on voting. This year, we've been partnering with a great organization, the Climate Voter Project and Environmental Voter Project. And together, we've already gotten 204,534 first-time environmental voters who have already cast their vote. So most of the credit there goes to the Environmental Voter Project, but over 50 chapters, CCL chapters have been involved, and we're excited about that.
It's fascinating work that you're doing there. You've mobilized an enormous number of people. How do you then make sure that they stay engaged once their elected representatives are in office?
Yeah, we provide a lot of support. We're basically a customer service organization, and the service we provide is engagement with democracy. So we invest a lot in our people. We know it's uncomfortable what we ask people to do, but we ask them to do it anyway. And they stick with us because I think that they really do experience breakthroughs in exercising that power. I've seen, people have been in this country, they've been voting citizens their entire lives, and then they come with us to the Hill for their first lobby day, and it's like they're like children. They light up because for the first time in their decades of life, they're experiencing their democracy and what it means to be a citizen in a way they never thought was possible. So I'm extremely proud of that work. I love that I get to see that light in the faces of our volunteers. And it's because we create those breakthroughs, because we challenge people to go to the edge of their comfort zone and a little bit beyond, and we support them as they're doing. That's how we keep our volunteers. We keep them engaged. We keep them coming back, and we emphasize building a relationship over time with their members of Congress. So it's not one and done. It's, we make it clear we're in this for the long haul. And there again, the appreciation and respect is key to being successful with that long-term relationship.
Brilliant. I think what you've done there is you've demonstrated that when people feel empowered, they can really make a difference, and that's what you're doing. You're empowering your people. Wonderful to
Absolutely.
hear. So, Michelle, if I could move on to you, you've got a lot of incredible stuff in the pipeline at Project Zero.
Yeah.
Project Zero focused on the ocean. To many people, the ocean feels distant and far removed because of course it's enormous and it's intimidating, and we can't see what's going on down below. So can you dive into how Project Zero came to be and what you're striving to accomplish? And additionally, can you talk about the importance of the oceans in relation to climate and why it really matters?
Yes, I will dive into that. And thank you for that introduction. And Dani, I just want to say I'm like really impressed by your organization, and I'd like to become a citizen lobbyist. It sounds really like a lot of fun. Uh, Project Zero was started by myself and a few other people who became aware of the trouble that the ocean is in. And, you know, the ocean is out of sight and out of mind, but it really is our life support system. It provides us every second breath we take, and provides jobs and food for billions around the country. It's also our biggest weapon in the climate crisis. It's the ocean is so awareness of all of those facts, however, is really low. Coupled with the fact that if you look at the global philanthropic pie, about 3% of global philanthropic funding goes towards the environment as a category, and within that, the ocean gets 6%. So it's got an awareness issue and a funding issue. So Project Zero was created to really kind of behave more like a brand would than a traditional charity, in that we create events and experiences that people enjoy in music and art and sports. And through those events and experiences, we raise awareness and open up new revenue streams towards getting a global network of ocean sanctuaries under protection.
Thank you. It seems that people often talk about the Amazon as being the lungs of the planet, but that the oceans really are the circulatory system. It's concerning to hear that the importance of the oceans in the fight against climate change hasn't been recognized sufficiently. What are you doing to try and change that? How are you getting into the minds of both the public and policymakers to try and make sure that they realize that ocean is that critical to what we're trying to stop here?
We don't focus so much on policy. I'm sorry to say, because I'm in this policy, this climate group. But we do focus on individuals and empowering individuals. So we reach people through things that they love to do. They love to look at art or go to concerts or participate in sports. And through those events and experiences, we give them information and empower them to participate. We recently did something where individuals could adopt their own little piece of the ocean, and those funds are used then to restore and protect the areas that we're working to protect. So did I answer all of your question?
Yeah, that was a great answer. I love the idea of kind of selling off little partitions of the ocean that people can then feel. That it's like people adopt an elephant. I love the idea of you can adopt a part of the planet as well, a part of the ocean.
Exactly. And the ocean is the blue heart of the planet. If they call the Amazon the lungs, I think the ocean's the blue heart of the planet. It keeps all of us alive. You know, if our planet would look like Mars without the ocean, and Mars isn't very habitable. So it provides a great service to us in terms of not just the air that we breathe, but also in sequestering carbon and sequestering carbon and circulating the climate.
Indeed. Well, so thank you, Michelle. Move on to Bryn. Bryn is Deputy Director of Climate Resolve, an organization in Los Angeles that focuses on bringing together local people, policymakers, and scientists to address climate change. Can you dive a little deeper into the types of projects that your team has been working on and what your current projects are right now in line with the upcoming election?
Sure, happy to. And so, you know, we do a fair amount of advocacy work to make sure that our public investments are lining up with the climate agenda, and we're not taking steps backwards. But then we also do a lot of project work on the ground with communities to make sure that those investments in climate solutions are really attainable to them. So we are all about engaging in authentic, culturally sensitive ways with lower income, vulnerable communities, so that they can self-determine and pursue climate solutions that improve their daily lives. So, you know, I'll continue the analogy of the lungs and the heart, and we work a lot with the transportation system, which I would call kind of the arteries of everyday life. It's what's getting people where they need to go, and it's also our largest source of greenhouse gas pollution in California. So we work a lot with trying to improve non-car options, help people not have to drive as far by having sort of better land use policies in place. And part of what allows us to do that is that in California, we've got a cap and trade system where our major carbon polluters are paying to be able to keep putting out greenhouse gas emissions. And the funds from that program are then reinvested into community climate solutions. So whether that's transportation options or building more affordable housing or transit, or restoring wetlands, or improving local water supply so we're not having to pump water over the mountains as much. There's a lot of different things we can be doing right in our backyard, right in our communities, to becoming more climate responsible. So.
Yeah, interesting. I love the idea of that. It's essentially carbon credits, which exist at an international level. Having that working at the local levels, a fascinating idea. Now, marginalized communities tend to be more affected by change than any other community. How has the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated the effects of climate change on marginalized communities in LA?
Sure. Well, I'll mention our transit service, and especially our bus service, is something we are fighting to keep alive right now, as budget cuts have really taken a hit to all sorts of public services, and so that's something we're focused on, because we know that the majority of transit-dependent people in LA really rely on the bus system to get where they need to go. I think I'd also highlight how this pandemic, we're sort of realizing the importance of air quality. There's been studies that have shown our parts of town that have the highest pollution burden are also where COVID cases have been the most severe. People have gotten it worse. And we know with rising temperatures that our smog problem is getting worse here in LA. So we've got some issues to solve there, and I hate to say it, but electric vehicles aren't gonna solve all that for us. So we need to do more to be cooling down the city, since that heat is a large source of forming that smog. So that's part of why we focus on the urban heat island effect in those lower income sort of parts of town that don't have as much tree canopy cover and are more paved over than other parts of town.
Tree canopy, everyone likes greenery around. It just makes you feel better, and it's such a positive thing to have. So it's one of the solutions that a lot of forward-thinking cities are following. The other one in Europe in particular is the use of bicycles. Is that possible in LA, given that it's a concrete jungle? Can you create a big cycle network? Because again, bikes are cheap, or can be cheap, and it's a great way of getting people outside, keeping them fit, improving their lung capacity, and all of those things.
It is all the above. Yeah, the majority of trips are under 3 miles. So if you have seen people start to give it a try again, we've got an event here that everyone loves called Ciclavia, where every couple of months they shut down a stretch of roads and invite people out onto bicycles. So for people who maybe haven't tried biking again since they were kids, it's a good opportunity for them to get out and kind of feel the community connections that you can experience when you are outside of your car bubble.
Definitely. Yeah, I took my daughter for a 2-hour bike ride today. She's 1.5 years old and sits in front of me as we cycle around the cities of Cardiff. It's brilliant. She loves it. So thank you, Bryn. Ivy, if I can move on to you, please. So welcome. From a young activist perspective, talk to us a bit about your work at 0 Hour. So let's start with learning more about the mantra behind 0 Hour and how the youth have been a real and pivotal driving force in the fight against climate change. And then how has your organization taken action, both individual and collective, while using policy as a guide to make effective change?
Yeah, of course. So our name is 0 Hour because we have 0 time left to act on climate. And part of our goal is conveying the urgency of this crisis. We need our leaders and the public to see this crisis for the threat it is and actually act as if there's 0 time left. We organize strikes and lobby days and media campaigns. And, we basically mobilize youth around the world to bring climate and the threat it poses to our entire generation to the attention of decision makers. And we're actually part of a coalition of youth organizations that we were involved in planning the September 20th climate strikes, and over 4 million people were out in the streets for that, and that's insane. And that's a mass movement we built because we're fighting for basically for the survival and the future of our generation. And I think while we haven't changed federal policy, that we have really shifted the national conversation around climate a lot. And it's noticeable over even the last 5 years. For example, during the 2016 presidential debates, climate, there wasn't even a single question about climate change.
Yeah, madness.
Sorry?
That's crazy, insane, given it's the most important issue of our time. Yeah.
Exactly. And now things like the Green New Deal, which is something that guides a lot of our action, is making headlines everywhere. And people across the country are coming out in support of ambitious climate policy. And I think that's because youth everywhere are leading this movement. And just to talk. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Out of interest, Ivy, because there's been a lot of causes before that have brought people out onto the streets, but nothing seems to have mobilized the youth quite in the way that climate change has. So what is it that makes climate change such a motivating issue for the youth of today?
Well, I think because, like I said, climate impacts our generation more than any other generation. We're the ones that are inheriting this crisis. We have to deal with the effects of it. And and it's something that impacts everybody around the world. And a lot of us are striking because we think, that people in power, that they're denying us of our rights to clean air and clean water and basic things like that. So.
I completely agree. Yeah, absolutely. So next question I'm going to move on is to Dani. Dani, are you there?
I'm here.
Great stuff. So from a federal level, can you talk to us a bit about how the landscape has changed with Congress over the past few years?
Yeah, the biggest change that we've seen over the past few years is actually in the attitude of Republicans. So we've seen this both in some of their public statements and in our own data. I mean, we go and we lobby Congress. For example, last June, we had 436 meetings with members of Congress. The year before that, we had 529 in a day. And we've been doing this for years. I read all those meeting notes. And one of the things I track is, are there examples of skepticism? Is a member of Congress expressing some well-trod climate skeptic trope? It was 20 to 30 members of Congress to bring that up. Last year, that only came up in 7 meetings. And this past June, it only came up in one meeting. So our experience is that there's been a big shift. And then when you look at what Republicans have been saying, there's been a really big shift. And there was an event January 16th of this year, the highest ranking Republican in the House, Minority Leader McCarthy, held a party-wide meeting, all the Republicans in the House, the topic of which was climate change. So this is before the pandemic really struck here. And just think about this. I mean, you have the highest ranking Republican in the House saying, we as a party need to figure this out. We saw that in our meetings in June. And what you see Republicans who know that they're not going to be punished by their leadership. Both the way parties work, both Democrats and Republicans, leadership is really important. And you don't want to get on the wrong side of leadership. For Republican leadership to say it's okay to be a Republican and try and address this, that's a big block which has been removed. So I think that the ambition of the Republican Party, I would like to see increase, but you are seeing more proposals come out, and I think that that's really important. The one that we're most excited about, that is a bipartisan piece of policy, is the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. This is a carbon price; it's a carbon fee. And what this basically does is the entire economy, not just transportation, not just power, all the economy, anybody who's using fossil fuels, they have to pay. And what that does is it makes cleaner sources of energy more competitive, more attractive, and you don't even have to know why it's attractive. So we like this. 100% of the revenues from this policy goes back to regular people. And so if you are carbon virtuous, if you're using less fossil fuels than your neighbor, than average, you actually get paid. So it sets up an incentive for everybody to be carbon virtuous. So that's something that we're excited about and we feel has some momentum right now.
I like that term, carbon virtuous. Now, there must be lobbies that work directly against you. Which of these lobbies have been particularly successful in manufacturing opposition to climate positive policies?
I try to focus on the positive, and what I'll do is I'll say the blockages that we see in Congress, it's less a concern about the policy, it's more about the politics. Members of Congress need to see more support from their supporters. And so what we're working on big time right now is trying to get businesses, trying to get community leaders, trying to get local faith groups to say, we want to see carbon pricing. This is the kind of policy that the IPCC 1.5 degree report said carbon pricing is a necessary component of ambitious climate policies. Let's do the necessary thing. If we've got to do it, let's do it now. And so we've been working on removing that barrier of support by getting leaders in our communities to say, we want to see this too.
Yeah, brilliant. I love it. And it's great. It ties in with Paris as well, which makes you international, but you're working on the local level. It's fantastic to see that intersection between the local and the international, which is vital, because this does affect us all at all levels. So, Michelle, if I could come back to you, back to the oceans.
Yes.
So I've been really interested to learn about global efforts to protect the oceans at the moment. So what protected areas currently exist, and what are other things that we should keep in mind to protect our oceans? For example, is there anything that we as individuals can do right now to save our oceans, and what kinds of policies should we be looking for from international governments?
Yes, and yes. So the ocean is 70% of our planet. About 2% of the ocean is strongly protected. There's about 4%. 4% of it is protected, but only about 2% is strongly protected. The ocean performs natural services to us, creates air, regulates climate, and stores carbon. And we need a healthy ocean to be able to perform at its optimal best to help keep us alive. So science has determined that we need to get 30% of the ocean under protection by 2030. We're working right now on a global network of ocean sanctuaries that exist within each country's exclusive economic zone, which is 200 miles from the shore. So every country has that 200 nautical mile EEZ. But what we really need is to get to 30% is a high seas treaty. And that will be for the ocean, much like Paris was for climate, that will allow a governing body to create this high sea network of marine protected areas, of ocean sanctuaries. That was supposed to be, 2020 was meant to be the year of the ocean until COVID, and things have kind of been pushed down the calendar, but we're hopeful that we'll get some momentum there and get that high seas treaty ratified. Things that everyday people can do is that, there's a great app that you can download on your phone from the Monterey Bay Aquarium, puts it out, called Seafood Watch. I think people should be really conscious of eating seafood that's been sourced sustainably. Overfishing is an enormous problem. Fish help sequester carbon. In fact, every single day, the greatest migration on our planet occurs when fish come from the twilight zone, and they rise up as the sun goes down, and they rise up and they feed, and as they sink back down, they poop. So they're sequestering carbon with that migration every day. We need fish in the ocean. A healthy ocean needs fish. So people need to be really conscious of the fish that they're eating. So downloading that app is one way to help. Voting, of course. I mean, everybody's got to vote for leaders that are going to guide us into a sustainable future. And then really watching, your own diet. I'm a vegan myself. That may be too extreme for some people, but maybe people could try meatless Mondays to start off. and really reducing their intake of red meat. And finally, I think the third thing is really, well, the other thing that I would suggest is to really be mindful if you're going to buy a car, to make sure that you're buying one that's really climate friendly as possible, because that car is going to be in the car ecosystem for about 20 years. So if you buy a diesel car today, it's going to be around for quite a long time.
Yeah, so much we can do as individuals, and as you've just pointed out, there really is a nexus between the overexploitation of marine resources and the ability of the oceans to absorb heat and carbon, just as there is in terrestrial ecosystems as well. So if I can move on to Bryn, as we're getting close to public Q&A time. We've got to get a couple of questions in for Bryn and Ivy first. So Bryn, we've been talking about local and national and international. What are some of the current policies that Climate Resolve is working on within LA? And can you shed some light on how you take those policies and promote them so they can be adopted by other cities and states around the country?
Sure. So I mentioned our bus system is something we're trying to get working. We realize that building new light rail lines is expensive and takes a lot of time, but there's a lot of opportunity there to be repurposing the street space we already have to be making our transit system work better for people. So getting bus only lanes is something we've taken lessons from other cities and have done some quick rollouts here in LA, and that's something we're trying to expand. Bike lanes as well is part of this, getting people better options for how they can get around without having to drive as much. Cool streets is another thing we work on. I mentioned urban heat, and I'd say it's related to trying to get people out of their cars if you try to make that street environment more pleasant for people to exist in. So I mentioned more trees, but we're also working here in LA on cool pavement, which is basically just a more reflective, lighter colored version of asphalt, so that we're not absorbing as much solar heat, but rather reflecting it. And that's something we've hosted sustainability directors from across the country, showing them that innovation. We were working on policies too to curb urban sprawl, so that we're not out there creating new wildfire risk. But that's something we look to places that have done urban growth boundaries and sort of been more effective at that. We've still got a sprawl ailment to cure here. Yeah, I don't know. I think, I would say a first step is just doing an inventory and knowing where your greenhouse gases are coming from. That's something our mayor has done. We've done locally to get a grasp on that, and then you devise strategies to attack those emissions. Also looking at the climate impacts that are hitting your region, and trying to devise strategies to reduce the harms that vulnerable communities are exposed to from those climate impacts.
Yeah, what I think is really important is the fact that there is some coordinated action between cities and states. It's not just people acting in silos. So like the Climate Mayors Initiative and various other things, there's been a realization that we need to work together to really make a difference. So if I could finish with Ivy before we move on to the public Q&A. Thank you, Bryn. So Ivy, can you talk about how Zero Hour uses personal stories of people impacted by climate change to really focus government attention on marginalized communities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a super important question because we don't talk enough about the huge human cost that climate change has, and we don't talk enough about the communities, around the world that are hit the hardest. And so I work in press, and so part of what my team does is to try to get as many different voices in the press as possible, and we help with things like pitching and op-eds, and we really want to try and uplift the voices of frontline youth, not just in the US. And doing that is something that's really central to our organization, because we know that in order to show the urgency of this crisis, we need to share stories of people and communities that are being devastated by climate right now. And we also know that in order to meaningfully address this crisis, we need to take the needs of marginalized communities seriously. And we need to address things like racism and colonialism. And part of how we spread awareness on this is sort of an ongoing educational campaign we have called Getting to the Roots of Climate Change, which is a presentation that partners and chapters have given across the country on basically the oppressive systems and inequalities that are the root of this crisis. And my job is to help spread this message, to let people know that this is a justice issue, and it requires solutions that address the inequality that started this crisis in the first place.
Muted now.
Thanks so much about your individual bits of work. We'll move on to some of the public questions now that are coming in. And the first one I can see coming in from Jane is, how can people at home join in helping the fight for better policy? Thank you, Jane. So we'll stick with the same order. So Dani, if you could take that to start with.
Yeah, Jane, it's a great question at the center of what we're doing here on this panel. And one of the things that I found in our work with our 195,000 supporters is that everybody has something to contribute. So I would start with where are your strengths? I mean, are you an introvert or are you an extrovert? I mean, if you're an introvert, writing is really important. Writing letters to your member of Congress, writing to your local paper, that's really important. If you're an extrovert, it's a little bit hard under current circumstances, but get out there in the community and talk to people, places, give presentations. And, one of the things that is really important is get together with other people. Climate is hard. It's emotionally draining. Do it together. It's better to, at the very least, you have somebody to complain with. And that really does make a difference. So whatever you do, whatever your skills are, whatever your strengths are, find somebody to do it with, and get out there. And I've been so surprised over so many times with what our volunteers come up with, things I never, ever would have thought of, they think of and they execute, and it totally rocks. So that's my pitch.
Someone along and do it with someone else, and everyone enjoys doing things together anyway, and can make a bit more of an impact that way. Great. So Michelle, how would you answer that question?
Well, we as an organization, we don't get involved in much policy, but I can speak from personal experience that when I want something to happen, I vote. I go to join groups with like-minded missions, and just try to get as involved as I can. I think Dani gave a perfectly beautiful answer.
Again. Yeah, he's been very good at this. Bryn.
Sure. I'd say, let your elected officials hear from you. Ask them if they have a plan on climate. Does your community have a climate action plan that's getting it to the Paris climate targets? And if they don't, push them to do more. Say that it's important to you and that you want to see bike lanes out there. You want better transit service. If you're fortunate enough to live near transit, welcome in neighbors of all income levels. So I think we can be strengthening our collective identity and not exacerbate. We can't be having a more segregated society come out of this. We need to welcome in our neighbors.
Very much so, and we have power as citizens, and we've got to exercise that power. So Ivy, how would the youth go about fighting for better policy?
Mm-hmm. I would really say that one thing that I think is really effective for us is finding community. I always tell people to find other young people that feel the way that you feel and care about the issues that you care about, because I think what keeps action going is community. And I guess in terms of specific strategies, take it beyond voting, if you, and I'll preface this by saying if you can do these things safely, because obviously we're in a pandemic, but if you can testify, phone bank, go to town halls, go to the offices of your state and local officials, hold webinars, do sit-ins, all of those things. We need all of it. So figure out, Yeah.
What you've talked about, and all of you have related to, is quite intimidating for a lot of people to do all this. And so the next question, which comes from Amy, I think touches on that. How do we empower regular people to get involved and exercise their citizenship? Because there's a big barrier for entry, or at least there seems like there is. And it's an intimidating thing to do, to go and meet a congressperson or whatever it is. So how do we get regular folk to feel that they can make a difference as well, and exercise their citizenship? Dani.
Yeah. So I think the first thing to remember is that it doesn't seem like it all the time, but members of Congress, they're people too, and you can fire them. That's what voting is. And so I think because there's that dynamic, when you go to meet with them, they kind of have to be nice to you. And if they're not nice to you, you can write a letter to the editor and point it out. So that's the first thing, is to remember that we're all human beings, even members of Congress. And then the second thing on how to do this, I mean, I would please use our resources. We have tons and tons of resources. So if you go to citizensclimatolobby.org, join, we'll get you started. And there's so many resources. Feel free, you can dive in and use them in any way you want. People have taken our resources and they use them for completely different issues in completely different ways than the way we've intended, and they've had success. So I think that we do have resources and tools that people can get a handle on. And as I said before, there's so many ways to bring your particular spark to bear in a way that is meaningful. So there's a lot of that on there. So if you want some help, check out our resources, take what speaks to you, and think about how you want to show the world your spark.
I think it's interesting that the first time I ever met with a minister of government, I remember being really surprised how easy it was to meet with them, how willing they were to speak, and how much more I knew about that subject than they did. And therefore, I could very quickly educate them about something and make it important to them. And I think that's something you said there, is that Congress people are just people, and they are. And you sitting in a room with them, you have a good conversation very quickly. So we're going to move on to the next question straight away, which comes from Sarah. And she wants to know how people can actually volunteer and get involved with the organizations here. So let's start with Michelle. Michelle, how can we get involved with your organization?
Very easily. You could sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social media, attend our events. We're going to be coming up with some tools. I think there's a lot of people feel kind of isolated sometimes. Well, we all feel isolated now, but I mean, in their what they're doing for the good of the planet. So I'm recycling and I'm not using plastic, but at the same time, people will all tell you that they're all being really good environmentalists. And then you go up to walk in the park after a sunny day here in London, and it's covered in plastic. So clearly people are not walking the walk. So I think that one of the ways that to be involved really is to be around, like us and like-minded people. And we're creating some tools to be able to show people that they're not alone in those actions. We should be coming out with something in a couple of months that I think is pretty exciting, that will build that community of people that can that will be challenged to reduce their carbon footprints, and then show that the collective action as a community, which I think hopefully will be empowering.
Thank you. Very good. So cancel the last question I'm just seeing on my screen. So Ivy, tell us how can we join 0 Hour?
Yes. You can. So if you go on our website, you can right off the bat, you can sign up to be a volunteer, and you'll get an email from our volunteer management director, and she'll tell you how to get involved. You can start a chapter. Or you can join a chapter. We have a lot of chapters all over the US. And definitely follow us on social media, because a lot of our actions right now are on social media and online. So definitely do that. Also stay tuned for our big Vote for a Future rally that's coming up soon. So that's another thing you can participate in. We hold a fair amount of virtual events that you can join. Super easy. So yeah.
Get online, I think is the message there. Get online. Bryn, the question to you is actually slightly more specific. So it comes from Ben. He'd like to know, in LA, who are the key decision makers that are critical to enacting change locally in Los Angeles, and how do we get out there and influence them positively?
Sure. Well, we've got our mayor. Mayor of the city of LA. He has a big role, and he appoints people to the Metro Board of Directors that controls our transportation decisions. We've also got the county supervisors. There's 5 of them, and that controls a lot of appointments to our public works board. So there are some pretty central decision makers that then have a lot of influence over governing bodies. So, I'll piggyback on to some of the last question too, and encourage people to follow Climate Resolve. We have a newsletter on our social media, and we try to connect you with action alerts so you can let those decision makers know how you would like them to act on climate.
Brilliant, thank you. So it was interesting. We had a question come in from Thomas, which got subsumed by a couple of others there, and he says one of the big arguments against the US participating in Paris is that the Paris Agreement is that countries like China and other nations will not be decreasing their production or consumption as much. And for Thomas, that's an argument for the US to pull out. For me, I think it's the opposite. I think the United States therefore has more of a responsibility to step up if other countries aren't towing the line as much. And just because someone's being terrible over there doesn't mean gives us an excuse to be terrible over here as well. Quite the opposite. We need to do more to counteract that. I wonder what you think about that, Dani, as well. Just because other countries aren't behaving, what should the US do?
I think that the people who are most likely to traditionally view the United States as a leader are the ones who have been most vocal in backing getting out of the Paris Agreement. And how can you lead if you're worried about what other countries are doing? I mean, this is if the United States is truly a leader and aspires to be a leader on this most important of issues, then why are we worrying about what other countries are doing? We should be going out there and showing the rest of the world how it's done, and we haven't been doing that. So to me, I think on this issue, should the United States be a leader? And if so, this should not even be a question.
I think it's a great answer. And for me, that's what the United States needs to go back again. If the United States wants to be great, it needs to be that leader. And for the last 4 years, it has not been a leader on the world stage. It's retreated from the world stage. And we here in the UK and everywhere around the world want you back. Bryn, what would be your take on that?
Yeah, well, I'd say, be the change you want to be. In California, we're trying to, we're proven that you can have economic growth and you can be making it a more just, equitable society at the same time that you're acting on climate. So I think, if we can show as a country that that it's doable, that we can be climate responsible and be improving quality of life. I don't see why that leading by example and sort of trying to be that role model shouldn't ultimately convince other countries that they might want to be part of that movement too.
Completely agree. Yeah. So Michelle, you've done a huge amount to inspire a lot of people. You obviously aren't taking a back foot just because other countries aren't towing the line. What do you have to say about America's position in this?
Well, America has to continue to be a leader, and I think disappointingly that some environmental protections have been rolled back, and I just dearly hope that things go well in the next couple of weeks and we can get back on track.
Yeah, very much so. Finally, Ivy, to finish before I do my closing monologue, you'll have the last word from the panel. So I'm interested to know from your perspective, you'll be engaged with activists from other countries. Do you see activists from countries like China and how they're responding to this? And how does the youth movement in the US interact with your international compatriots?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think people see that the US really has a responsibility in acting on climate change, because we are one of the wealthiest nations in the world and we contribute to, an overwhelming amount of emissions. And so I think people really think we have a responsibility to help other nations transition to clean energy. You know, not only ourselves, we have a responsibility to, you know, address things worldwide. So
you do indeed. We all do. So thank you to our marvelous panelists, Brynlindblatt, Dani Richter,
Thank you.
Michelle Clark, and Ivy Jagmeet. And thanks to all of you at home for tuning in as well. I hope that you learned something from this session. I know I did. But most of all, I hope that today's session made you feel empowered. Being a good citizen is a big responsibility, and being a good global citizen is an even bigger responsibility. As a final call for action before I close this panel, with 2 weeks to go before the next president of the United States is voted into office by their fellow citizens, I think it's appropriate to reflect on the words of a past president and use them as motivation. John F. Kennedy said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Right now, your country needs you, and the rest of the world needs you too.
What's up? It's Boy A from the Future Party here in space, chilling. Hope you enjoyed the video. I enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for more notifications. We've got some amazing things coming up. Check out the description on who the Future Party is. It's gonna be great.